Hey guys, Thomas Jr. here, aka Mustached, here to review the series The Last of Us. If you end up enjoying this full series review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you over to my petition to help out smaller YouTubers. Second and third to my Patreon and PayPal, where you can help support me and my channel directly. And fourth to my Discord server, where you can join there and chill your own content for free. And shilling will be reminded at the end of the review. With all of that out of the way, let's get into The Last of Us, the series. So, for those who are not in the know, which there might be some, but I would highly be doubtful, but The Last of Us is based off of a video game that was critically acclaimed a little whiles ago at this point. And definitely was a turning point for video game stories in general, especially when the first iteration of the video game The Last of Us turned out. It showed that, or it re-showed, I would want to clarify, that video games could tell a compelling story while also having at least decent gameplay. And that is exactly what The Last of Us brought in its iteration. Now, you might have seen me do that on my channel, the first few parts, if I remember. I might have done a single part on my channel, if I did. But I never completed it on this channel, the full game anyways. But I have beaten the game on my own accord. Of course, I have not played The Last of Us 2, but I know its full story by watching others play it, so I know how terrible that game is in terms of how it tells its story and how fallen apart it is. But that is, of course, in reference to just the video game. So, it was obviously with bated breath or nervousness, whichever side you're on what this adaptation of The Last of Us would do. Obviously, the whole video game thing being bad aspect has been broken actually a while back ago, as early as the first Silent Hill movie, if, you know, maybe not a great adaptation, but I would have argued back then a decent enough horror movie, video game movie. And after that, there was Mortal Kombat Scorpion's Revenge, which was one of the best video game movies I think I've seen. If you have not seen that, I would highly recommend it. There was the poorly adapted, but rather still good video game movie, the Sonic the Hedgehog movies, the 1 and 2. Again, not faithful adaptations, but decent enough, you know, in that regard. I'd only heard that Arcane is good. I have not seen the show myself, so I can't comment on that one by myself. I'm just gonna assume that based off of what I've been hearing about Arcane is that it is good currently, because I have, again, have not had the pleasure of seeing it myself, or the dissatisfaction if everyone's somehow been lying about Arcane. But that's about all those shows. We're here to talk about The Last of Us. And unlike other series where I just go through sort of generally the whole thing, I thought I'd mix it up a bit and talk about the critiques I had heard about this particular show first, and it sort of addressed those, as I thought those are really interesting. Some of them are really horrible and bad critique, so I thought I'd go through all of those, or at least some of the ones I caught on to. So yeah, I think the one that was probably the most commonly espoused by creators of criticism was the pacing issue, and I would consider this more of a praise rather than a criticism, is that they wanted more of the show to sort of I guess, flesh out these characters. Obviously, this season was 9 episodes long. That is relatively short, though there have been shorter seasons. Some show seasons are like 6 episodes long, so I've considered the 3 episodes a blessing a little bit, considering how many shows I've seen of recent status that have only been 6 episodes. So there was that on my end, is that I had come out of seeing a lot of shows that were 6 episodes rather, not 6 seasons, 6 episodes, and they were all pretty blah, to mediocre at best. So yeah, that was a little bit refreshing, but I do understand the sentiment behind more episodes a season. As of currently, I've been watching Digimon Ghost Game, which is like 1 season, but we're already at like episode 60, so that's like, that feels like vintage, you know, how I used to grow up, how shows used to have seasons. It's like, they used to have like full, like, several episodes worth of content. So it's not that, obviously. And obviously I don't think it needed to be that much longer. So I'm trying to figure about how many more episodes people were seemingly wanting here. And it almost seems like the consensus is either 1 or 2. I don't think you could have pushed it past more than 2 episodes without it starting to feel clunky or even messy at points. And potentially even ruining something, because otherwise I do think that those, obviously with more content, you always kind of run that risk within a season of a given thing. Same thing if it's too short, is that the pacing is going to feel almost like how it did here, is felt a bit fast-paced. Which I'm not even saying, me personally, I'm not even saying that's not necessarily even a bad thing. I don't think that's necessarily indicative of being bad. In fact, I would say that the way they handled the pacing was rather admirable at times, considering how much time they had to tell this entire, video game's worth of a story. Because every episode, for the most part, is pretty packed with something going on. So I wanted to address that criticism first, because it did feel like that's the most common sentiment. Now, I will say the other ones I had a lot more issues with in terms of the said criticisms. There was this criticism of there weren't enough infected, and I'm gonna put a bit of pushback on that one. So I wrote down on my list over here to my side, you can't see it, but I wrote down the episodes and what episodes have infected and which don't. And in total, out of the 9 episodes, there are 4 total episodes that feature 0 infected. Now that sounds like, well, a lot, obviously. 4 out of the 9, that's practically half. However, I would argue that we actually need to see more than just the infected, rather than seeing more infected. And that's exactly what this show gives us, is it gives us raiders, it gives us cannibals, it gives us, well, in this version they call it Fedra, which is like this organization of, like, as the show puts it in the writing, the terrorist group or the liberators, depending on which side you are on. There are definitely several human groups in the video game as well that were posing a threat, so it wasn't just about avoiding infected. So I don't think that criticism is all that strong, considering that we also need to see just how fucked up people are. We need to see that, and again, episode 4 is the first time we see this, where there's no infected, and that's where and instead we see what raiders are doing in this world, how they are essentially going about taking out people and stuff like that. The next episode that doesn't feature any infected is episode 6, which is the episode where the brothers, Joel and his brother Tommy, finally reunite. Which is a great episode, by the way. So, again, I'm not sure why that one would need infected at all. Like, I'm not sure why you would need to implant infected in that episode when it doesn't even need it. And the same thing can be said for the Raider episode and the last two episodes, which also don't feature any infected, that being episodes 8 and 9 respectively. Episode 8 featuring the cannibals, which again doesn't need infected, and episode 9, which involves Fedra, but then also doesn't involve any infected. So again, I'm really pressed to understand why people kept saying that there needed to be more infected. I am one to disagree on that criticism. Again, the problem with that criticism is I was actually afraid that they could do the opposite, and in a sense they got really close to doing it here. They did. One death in this series is objectively just stupid. Like, there's no defending it. Like, it looks cool subjectively, sure. You can feel like that looks cool and blah blah, but objectively, like, what that guy did during the infected horde in episode 5 was just stupid. For those who don't know, episode 5 features an infected horde coming in, as well as what's called a bloater, which is a big infected with the round belly. And this guy who's like trying to defend their leader has a gun and he's like shooting it, and he sees that it has no effect, and he kind of steps a few paces back but keeps shooting and stands there. Like, that's just stupid. Like, there's no counter argument to that. That is just stupidity at that point. If you're just gonna stand there and shoot, you can at least keep attempting to back up. Like, he's not up against the wall. He's like in an open street where he can back up. He has the space to back up. He just stops and lets himself get caught and ripped apart. Like, the fuck? That death, I'm sorry, but that death is the stupidest death in this entire show. There's no argument there. I'm sorry. It's awful. It's god-awful. But everything else is relatively good here. So I wanted to point that out. Is the episode that ironically has the most infected has the stupidest death attached to it. So that should tell you why I think that criticism is dog shit. Exactly. And it's also something, and I'm going to make a comparison. I often don't try to do these, but I think it's pretty apt, because some of these comparisons were made to The Walking Dead, even outside of just me. So I feel like, again, because it also deals with the apocalypse and deals with a type of zombie. Of course, The Walking Dead zombies are the more traditional sense of zombies, but that's neither here nor there. Point being is that, like, the show eventually got to the point where, like, there were super hordes of, like, long list hordes of zombies, and, like, a lot of their deaths seemed really stupid, and, interacting with zombies and, how to deal with them could affect how people are seen through their actions. That is exactly why I think the use of the infected was actually great here. I'm going to make the opposite argument. I think the restraint of using infected is actually the kiss of the, what you should strive to do. And it also adds on the layer of, and one or two infected are scary to handle. And I actually think that, again, through the scenes that we see these episodes in, really demonstrate that, because every episode there is somebody dying, or at least a good chunk of the episodes, someone is dying. I mean, episode 1, so now we're going in order. We're dealing with our sort of preamble into the apocalypse scenario. We're learning about Sarah and Joel. Sarah is Joel's daughter in this, and we're following her primarily, and we see how things are starting to escalate throughout the episode, and by the end of it, Sarah is taken out by a human, and I think that is indicative of the season finale. It's a human taking out another human in a certain point in time, and we'll get there. Episode 2 is the first episode that deals with a horde. We see them hear Tess and Joel and Ellie at this point in this building, and they're able to, like, the infected in this version are able to commune with each other through this sort of hive mind way, so they have an additional ability here, and this of course leads to the death of Tess. So that's episode 2 death. Episode 3, which, yes, faced criticisms from stupid conservatives that are like, there was gay people, so it's bad because it's gay. And, more proper critics are able to just point out, like, oh, there's that one weird moment where Bill's in the center of the street and he kind of just takes a shot, which doesn't compute with Bill's ability to be a survivalist. And I agree with that criticism. That criticism is fair. Obviously, the way to fix that minor criticism is to have Bill off hidden, have Frank then come out, and then see Bill see Frank come out, and then try to make his way over. And if you want the same sort of oh no moment, then you can have Bill get clipped on his way over to trying to get to Frank. I think that way you can both utilize Bill's survivalist instinct, but show that he also loves Frank simultaneously. And that love sort of compels him to move towards him and sort of block him from thinking in that sort of pure survivalist way. And of course, the episode ends with the death of both Bill and Frank regardless. So there are consequences in that episode, even though it does not follow our primary characters for the most part. But this show is called The Last of Us, not the Joel and Ellie show, so the fact that episode 3 does follow a separate group of characters here for the most part is kind of irrelevant, and you can also see the parallels between the groups and how they interact with each other, even though they don't really interact with each other in the way that it was done in the video game, but you can sort of see the tethers of what Bill had wanted, and you can start to see, even with Tess, to that degree, what the themes of the show are from these two episodes. So it's still setting up a lot of material that is absolutely needed, and I don't think you can effectively tell the story without having these sort of little setups that sort of reinforce the message of this show. Especially when Bill has the written note that's like one of the biggest ones of like, yeah, that's sort of like the theme of the show of like, I found someone to fight for, so I'm gonna do that. As I mentioned, episode 4 deals with the Raiders. So yeah. And as I was talking about in episode 5, which is the entire infected horde and the stupidest death in the entire show, we also get the death of Sam and Henry here, as well as the rest of the Raiders, or at least that entire city, is just lost to the infected. So that one's a pretty big loss in terms of, how crazy this world can be. Episode 6, as I mentioned, is one of the episodes that I mentioned that doesn't have any infected, and it's where Joe again meets Tommy. And for the most part, this episode is sort of our sigh of relief. It's sort of our, like, the rest of the world outside has been sort of shit up until this point, and it really shows through the acting, it really shows through the character moments in the episode that, like, Joel's finally able to let his guard down here with his brother, so he's able to just, let himself get emotional. And for some reason, some critics got mad at the use of communism, and I was like, why? I legit just went to Google, so I was like, okay, so what is communism, okay? So, this is like one of those political theory by Karl Marx. I just searched this from Google, which says, advocating class war and leading to society in which all property is publicly owned and each person works and is paid according to their abilities and needs. That's a communist. Oh my god, how scary. Like, I was like, so people were mad at that term? I'm like, why? It's accurate. I'm so confused. Like, seriously, there was a critic that stopped watching the show on that episode because they used the term communism, and because, in addition to the story being woke, aka diverse, because it had two of the gay characters, Bill and Frank. We learn later on, one episode later, of Ellie's relationship status. So yeah, I don't know. It's silly. Anyway, we're gonna move on now. So, episode 7, for those of you who don't know, this was originally in The Last of Us considered downloadable content, which is the backstory for Ellie, in which we learn how she got bit initially, and being with Riley, someone who just got into Fedra, and Ellie herself is a part, Riley is a part of the Fireflies, and Ellie is a part of Fedra, so let me correct myself there. So they're two young people, both a part of a separate groups, two different groups that are dealing with each other, and so on and so forth, but they're going out, they're getting a little tipsy / drunk, so this to me excuses Riley's behavior towards the end of the episode, where she's unable to think as clearly as she probably could have. So for again, this sort of is like, it's the so whereas episode with the brothers reuniting, this is like the most wholesome that episode is, and we're like, again, as I just stated, it's like the first time where you get to see a break from everything. This episode is essentially that compounded into one moment, but we see in this episode, and just like the last episode, end both with those moments do not last, and that's sort of the point of this entire segment, is that those moments are fleeting, unfortunately, due to this world, and we do get infected. And yeah, I will say again, it is a little bit messy here for Riley's death and how they handled it, and they, for whatever reason, all three of the bites with her herself, Tess included, and Ellie herself also, those three, they're all dramatic reveals of, like, we don't ever see the bite actually occur, but we see it after the fact, which makes me shrug. It's like, oh, yeah, sure, fine. But, again, I would consider what I just mentioned is that Riley was drinking, so she was a bit drunk, sure. Probably, her thoughts were probably a little bit more, haggard there. Obviously, Ellie and Riley end up kissing in this episode, so that confirms Ellie's relationship status, as I was mentioning. So, wouldn't be surprised if other people caught up to that episode and were like, oh, blah, blah, blah. Um, but, you know, it's still a very much needed episode in saying, like, this is like, you know, young people wanted to kind of have a moment of, like, they just want to live, you know? It's like, that's sort of the point of The Last of Us, living, you know? It's sort of like the broader stroke of what's kind of being, you know, brought to the attention is like, well, it didn't last. It couldn't have lasted. Again, it's a little bit messy, but again, it's not the worst. I wouldn't say it's the worst death in the show. Obviously, I gave that to the guy who just stood there and took it. And hey, it actually could have been even worse than those two. It's not like The Walking Dead, like Carl, where, you know, Carl was stupid and young and used to approach walkers / aka zombies, and then got better at killing zombies, even dealt with hordes of zombies, and then gets killed by one zombie off screen for dramatic effect, and then we had to see how stupid that came together after the fact, and his whole death is, you know, really, really stupid, considering that it's not even, you know, it's off the beaten path of where the comics are, also, in addition to just looking pretty shit and making a lot less sense than, at least Riley has the excuse of being drunk and young and probably not as well equipped to, like, aim the gun properly with all of those layers of information that we are barely given here, or, you know, the little tidbits of information, I should rather say. Excuse me. So there's that episode. Episode 8, again, not dealing with infected, but rather a group of cannibals. We see Joel being knocked out here because he was messed up in episode 6, and then we see episode 7 doing the backstory, and episode 8 is sort of we're coming back to see what they're up to, and we sort of see these cannibals, primarily this one leader cannibal, primarily. The rest of the town kind of partake without really some of them even knowing. Some of them do seem to know. And it's a great episode. Once again, not feature any infected, but it's really, really great. Episode 9 deals with the penultimate season finale, which deals with Joel dealing with the Fireflies to get to Ellie. So, now, I didn't get to put in my 2 cents when the video game came out about the choices that were made for the video game. So, now I am finally granted an ability to weigh in on the whole debate, because I think that is what a really great show should be able to do, is sort of propose something a little bit more complex with, you know, really interesting characters along the way. It is that in addition to all of that great stuff and great scenery and great acting and just a lot of great things simultaneously being sort of shot out here, is being able to make the audience think long after the fact of, like, well, did Joel do the right thing? For those of you who don't know, so I guess spoiler alert at this point well, I mean, technically if you played the video game you would have already known, but, you know, I also posted this, you know, I wanted to give a little bit of breathing room just in case, but I'm just saying spoiler alert just to be safe, on the safe side. Anyway, here we see that Ellie is immune. It's the whole shtick that we see pretty much laid out on us in episode, I think as early as 2 or 3, that we learn about this. Or even episode 1, I don't remember which one. It's one of the earlier episodes that we learn Ellie is immune. Point being is that they think on the Firefly's side that she can provide a cure. Unfortunately, the way that this works is that the cordyceps grow in the brain, meaning that they would have to kill Ellie to conjure up said cure. And through that, they would be able to obviously spread it out and do all that stuff. So, obviously, Joe's not a fan of that outcome, seeing as throughout this entire season, he's been growing closer and closer to Ellie as a sort of surrogate father, more so in the video game, but I think there's enough space here to still warrant that connection through what we see. So again, the pacing, I think, is actually really great in that regard, is that you already feel it. By the time you're at episode 9, you're like, yep, that makes total sense, that he would make that choice. And so, too, would probably most fathers in that regard, I'm pretty sure. And I will say, again, adding my 2 cents into this, obviously, is that the amount of things that are against the Fireflies in this is what makes this choice so interesting. I mean, first and foremost, and thankfully the writing permitted this, is that in both versions, it's left to a gamble. There's no real guarantee that this is actually going to make a cure. That's not what's being said in the episode. They say they can possibly synthesize a cure. Possibly being the key word there. It's a gamble. It really is. At the end of the day, we don't know. We don't know if they took that out, if that would guarantee a cure. There's no way of knowing. And that's absolutely the decision that needed to be here as well as in the video game. That level of, if it's a gamble, well, which one do you go with? Do you take the gamble or do you not? To save the world, reminder, that's what we're trying to do here, or at least that's sort of the antithesis of the theme here, or one of them anyway. Not only is it a gamble, but let's assume that it worked. How do you give the cure to everybody? I mean, that's a legitimate question. That's question number 2. And it's a great question, because remember, this is the Fireflies. You know who would face-to-face off with the Fireflies? Fedra. And you know what else? And I'm going to point directly here to you, the audience, and remind people that the third thing, not only do they have to deal with a competitor like Fedra, but there are also these stupid people in the world who are just going to be stupid. And if you don't believe me on that third one, well, look no further than real life. I mean, look what happened with COVID. A real life thing that happened in real life. And people were anti-mask and they were anti-vaccine. You're gonna tell me that there wouldn't be people in this world that wouldn't be anti-cure, that wouldn't buy that this is the solution, that it would guarantee that they were to be cured from being infected? If you answer yes to this, you're bullshitting me. You're absolutely bullshitting me if you say yes to that. Absolutely 100% no other way. People are stupid. There's no way you'd be able to get everybody with this. Because again, how would you spread it? Like, would you do it like mandates? Well, we had again, look at COVID. We had problem with mandates of like, well, we're requiring you to get the vaccine. Like, would people be up for that level of it? I mean, again, how would the Fireflies even do this? How would Fedra interact with Fireflies? There are so many questions. There's so much of a fucking gamble. And even beyond that, they don't have Ellie's consent on both versions, and I'm glad they also kept this as well. She's knocked out. She does not have the consent. She was not explicitly ever told at any point that, it would take killing her to get said vaccine. See, it's almost like she kind of figured that they would take like a blood sample from her, some other part of her body to get it, but no, it grows in the brain, as Joel points out in the last episode. But again, she's knocked out. She can't even give consent. So there's that on top of all the other, on top of it just being a fucking gamble, on top of it all, it's like, yeah, when you go through all of that, it's like, I don't know, I'm gonna lean toward Joel's side here, absolutely. It's like, yeah, absolutely, I'm sorry, I'm putting my, again, I'm picking a side here, I'm putting my 2 cents on the choice that was made all those years ago. Joel made the correct decision here, absolutely. Because again, it's based on a fucking gamble, first of all. Among the myriad of different other issues that come along with it. So obviously, when he enters the building, he is shooting down the fireflies. And I've already seen some people saying he's a monster. They've shown him being a monster. Like, there was a guy who was, like, putting down his gun. Therefore, Joel killing him was, like, monstrous, even though that guy was shooting at him earlier. On top of the additional information is that you hear that one of them has a walkie-talkie, so I don't fucking want to hear that excuse, because it's actually bullshit. Because while that guy might have given up, he could have called for backup, and then he would have killed Joel. So no, you're stupid if you think letting that guy live is a good, is like, no, you should absolutely kill that guy. Why would you risk that? Again, gambling. Why would you risk that? When they have radios, you hear the first guy when Joel and the 2 escorts are escorting him down. You hear the radio saying shots fired over the radio. How do people? I don't understand. How did people come to the opposite conclusion? I'm so confused. Like, the episode is so explicit on everything on that episode. It's, like, so bizarre. Anyway, that's my side. But, obviously, I've seen the story of The Last of Us 2, and how much that falls apart with certain elements, with Joel in particular, and how they're going to deal with that. That's for another time. Obviously, we're sticking to being objective about this season of The Last of Us. And in terms of that, in terms of a score that I would give this, I would absolutely give this show a 9 out of 10. And I know that's not a 10 out of 10, it's not a perfect. I mean, obviously, I was able to still point out some of the criticisms that I still maintained, like the little minor things, but they're all, to me, really minor, but they kind of do pick apart from that 10 out of 10, sort of like, this is just an absolute masterpiece. But a 9 out of 10 is still an impressive score, so, I think that this is still the best video game adaptation series that we currently have for a video game. And again, that's only sticking with Season 1. So, obviously, Season 2 has already been confirmed, so that's going to be following The Last of Us 2, presumably. And oh boy, does everybody who's already played the games already have their flags up on that one, and I can definitely, follow in that agreement at the very most, in terms of how they deal with certain elements in that story, and more importantly, how they were executed and how shit it was in part 2 of how shit it was executed in the video game of part 2. So we will see how closely they will stick to part 2, if they will maintain that. Hopefully they will, because some things here and there are a little, like, swerves. I hope that they can learn that the swerve can actually gravely help them in Season 2. But only time will tell with that. So, that is my review of The Last of Us. And if you ended up enjoying it, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you over to my petition to help out smaller YouTubers, second there to my Patreon and PayPal, where you can help support me and my channel directly, and fourth to my Discord server, where you can join, collab, and chill your own content for free. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.